The courthouse steps felt cold beneath my feet as I walked away from what should have been the most devastating day of my life. Instead, I was smiling. Not the kind of smile you show at dinner parties or family photos. The kind that comes from watching someone dig their own grave while handing you the shovel. 3 months earlier, I thought I knew my husband. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years. 8 years of building what I believed was a partnership. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who could make anyone believe in his vision of the future. I fell for it completely. When his grandfather died and left him $450 million, I thought our lives were about to become everything we'd dreamed of. The inheritance came with strings attached, of course. Old money always does. But Marcus handled the lawyers, the estate planning, all of it. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in our kitchen, the one with marble countertops and windows overlooking the garden I'd spent 3 years cultivating, making coffee like any other day. The doorbell rang. A sheriff's deputy stood on my front porch holding papers that would change everything. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." The words swam on the page. This had to be a mistake. This was our house. Our home. I'd picked out every piece of furniture, chosen every paint color, planted every flower in that garden. I called Marcus immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried his office. His assistant said he was unavailable. When I finally reached him that evening, his voice was different. Cold. Like talking to a stranger wearing my husband's face. "The inheritance came with conditions," he said. "No emotion. No explanation. Just facts delivered like he was reading a grocery list." I had to make some difficult decisions. Difficult decisions. As if throwing your wife out of her home was the same as choosing between brands of breakfast cereal. What conditions, Marcus? We're married. We're supposed to make these decisions together. You wouldn't understand the complexity of it. That phrase. You wouldn't understand. 8 years of marriage, and suddenly I was too stupid to grasp the intricacies of his inheritance. The man who used to ask my opinion on everything from business deals to what tie to wear was now treating me like an unwelcome houseguest. "I'll contest this," I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. "With what money? With what lawyers? Be realistic." The line went dead. I sat in that beautiful kitchen, surrounded by everything I'd helped build, and felt something inside me break. Not my heart. That would come later. This was something sharper, cleaner. The sound of my illusion shattering. Most women in my position would have crumbled. I did, for about 20 minutes. I cried into a dish towel that still smelled like the lavender fabric softener I bought because Marcus said he liked the scent. Then I dried my eyes, made another cup of coffee, and got to work. You see, Marcus had made one critical error in his rush to reshape his life. He'd underestimated me. Not just my intelligence or my resourcefulness, though he'd clearly forgotten about both. He'd underestimated how well I knew him, how carefully I'd been paying attention for 8 years. Including the day we signed our prenuptial agreement. Marcus had insisted on the prenup early in our engagement. His family money, he'd explained, had to protect the assets. I'd been young and in love and frankly intimidated by the whole process. But I wasn't stupid. I'd learned that lesson from my mother, who'd lost everything in her divorce because she'd signed papers without reading them. I hired my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance who specialized in matrimonial law and had a reputation for being thorough. Marcus's lawyers had drawn up their standard document, full of clauses designed to protect his premarital assets and limit my claims in case of divorce. But Patricia had added something they hadn't expected. A reciprocal inheritance clause. If either party received a significant inheritance during the marriage, the other spouse was entitled to half, regardless of whose family the money came from. The language was careful, precise, and buried deep enough in the legal jargon that Marcus's lawyers had missed it entirely. Marcus had signed it without reading it. I'd counted on his arrogance, and he'd delivered. The morning after the eviction notice, I called Patricia. She was retired now, living in a condo in Florida, but she remembered me. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice warm with satisfaction. "I've been wondering when you'd call." "You knew this might happen?" "Honey, I've been doing this for 35 years. Rich men think they're smarter than everyone else right up until they're not. Your husband just painted himself into a corner." Patricia recommended someone local. David Chun, a lawyer who specialized in high-asset divorces and apparently had a gift for making wealthy men very uncomfortable. I made an appointment for that afternoon. David's office was everything you'd expect from someone who made his living dismantling the financial fortresses of the privileged. Modern, expensive, designed to intimidate. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with a kind of quiet intensity that suggested he'd seen enough human nature to lose his illusions about it. "Tell me about the inheritance," he said after I'd explained the situation. $450 million. His grandfather's estate. "All of it came during your marriage?"
Yes.
"His grandfather died 6 months ago." David smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "And your husband evicted you to comply with inheritance conditions." That's what he said. "Mrs. Harrison, I've handled a lot of these cases. Inheritance conditions that require divorcing a current spouse are extremely rare and usually unenforceable. Your husband is either lying or his lawyers are incompetent." The room seemed to shift around me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband wanted you gone, and he's using the inheritance as an excuse. But he's also just made the biggest mistake of his financial life." David explained it to me slowly, like he was teaching a masterclass in legal warfare. The reciprocal inheritance clause wasn't just about the money. It was about timing. Marcus had received the inheritance while we were married, which made it marital property regardless of his family's wishes. By evicting me and attempting to hide assets, he demonstrated intent to defraud me of my legal rights. That turned a simple divorce into something much more serious. "We're going to freeze everything," David said. "Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate. All of it. And we're going to do it today, before he has time to move anything offshore." "Can you do that?" "Mrs. Harrison, your husband just declared war on someone who came armed with a nuclear weapon. He brought a knife to a gunfight, and he's about to find out what that feels like." The legal system moves slowly until it doesn't. Emergency motions filed that afternoon. Temporary restraining orders signed by judges who understood the urgency of preventing asset flight. By 5 p.m., Marcus Harrison's fortune was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I was having dinner at a small Italian place near David's office when Marcus called. My phone rang 6 times before I answered it. "What the hell have you done?" His voice was shaking with rage. "I hired a lawyer, like you suggested. You can't do this. That money isn't yours." "Actually, Marcus, according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, half of it is exactly mine." Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, "What prenuptial agreement clause?" Section 12, subsection C, reciprocal inheritance provisions. "You might want to have your lawyers look it up." Another silence. This one felt different. Heavier. The sound of a man realizing he'd been outsmarted by the woman he'd just tried to crush. "You planned this?" "No, Marcus. I prepared for it. There's a difference." He hung up. I finished my dinner, tiramisu and all, and went to my hotel room. The Marriott downtown wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it was mine. Nobody could evict me from a room I'd paid for with my own credit card. The next few weeks were a masterclass in legal theater. Marcus's lawyers, a white shoe firm that charged $800 an hour to tell rich men what they wanted to hear, scrambled to understand how their bulletproof prenuptial agreement had turned into a suicide vest. David, meanwhile, was having the time of his professional life. Discovery motions flew like artillery shells. Depositions were scheduled. Financial records that Marcus had assumed would remain private were suddenly being examined under microscopes by forensic accountants who specialized in finding hidden assets. The inheritance conditions Marcus had claimed required our divorce turned out to be fiction. His grandfather's will mentioned no such requirements. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Marcus had decided he wanted a different life, One that didn't include the wife who'd supported him through law school, who'd hosted his business dinners, who'd given him 8 years of her life while he climbed the ladder to success. The other woman turned up in week 3 of Discovery. Cynthia Fleming, 26, blonde, with an Instagram account full of designer handbags and tropical vacations. She'd been in the picture for over a year, which explained why Marcus had grown so cold, so distant. Why he'd stopped touching me, stopped seeing me as anything more than an obstacle to his new life. I felt something break all over again when David showed me the photos. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, a paper trail of betrayal that went back 14 months. But this time, what broke wasn't my heart. It was the last chain holding back my anger. Marcus had played me for a fool, made me question my own worth while he planned his exit strategy. Let me believe that our marriage was failing because of something I'd done, some way I'd disappointed him, when the truth was that he'd simply found someone younger and decided to upgrade. The fury that followed was clean and cold and absolutely focused. Marcus had taught me a valuable lesson about trust and betrayal. Now I was going to teach him one about consequences. David filed a motion for permanent spousal support based on Marcus's adultery and financial misconduct. In our state, cheating spouses who attempted to hide assets faced severe penalties. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd clearly seen her share of entitled husbands, was not sympathetic to Marcus's situation. But the real stroke of genius came from our forensic accountant, a soft-spoken man named Robert Kim who had the supernatural ability to follow money through the most complex financial structures. Robert discovered that Marcus hadn't just hidden his affair. He'd been systematically transferring marital assets to accounts controlled by shell companies, preparing for the divorce he'd been planning for over a year. He's been moving money since before his grandfather died, Robert explained during one of our strategy sessions. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers disguised as business expenses. Investment in fake companies, consulting payments to non-existent firms. Your husband has been planning this for a very long time. That was when David's smile turned truly predatory. Premeditated fraud. He's not just hiding assets, he's stealing them. This just became a criminal matter. The criminal referral changed everything. Suddenly Marcus wasn't just facing a messy divorce. He was looking at potential prison time for fraud, money laundering, and theft of marital assets. His lawyers went from confident to panicked overnight. They called David within 24 hours, requesting an emergency meeting. They want to negotiate, David told me over the phone. What's their offer? They're scared. Really scared. They'll probably offer you 30% of the inheritance to avoid criminal charges. 30%, I repeated, of $450 million. $135 million, yes. It's not nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But it wasn't justice. What do you think we should do? David was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, professional. Mrs. Harrison, I can't advise you on what's morally right. I can only tell you what's legally possible. We have them completely cornered. Your prenuptial agreement entitles you to half the inheritance. The adultery and asset hiding could get you spousal support that brings your total closer to 60%. If we pursue criminal charges, there's a good chance Marcus ends up in federal prison, which means you'd be entitled to control the entire estate while he serves his sentence. And the mansion? The house was purchased with marital funds. It's yours regardless. His eviction notice was illegal. We can have you back in there by tomorrow if you want. I thought about that house. The kitchen where I'd gotten the eviction notice. The garden I'd planted. The bedroom where I'd slept next to a man who'd been planning to betray me for over a year. I want it all, I said. The negotiation took place in David's conference room on a Thursday morning in November. Marcus sat across from me at a polished mahogany table, flanked by 3 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. He'd lost weight since the asset freeze began. His face was drawn, older somehow. The confident man who dismissed me as too stupid to understand complex financial matters was gone. He couldn't look at me directly. I found that interesting. David laid out our position with the methodical precision of a surgeon. The prenuptial clause entitling me to half the inheritance. The evidence of adultery. The systematic asset hiding that constituted criminal fraud. The illegal eviction. By the time he finished, Marcus's lead counsel looked like he was attending his own funeral. Our client is prepared to offer Mrs. Harrison 40% of the inheritance, the lawyer said weakly. Your client is prepared to offer what he's legally obligated to provide, David replied, plus damages for his criminal conduct. We'll take 50% of the inheritance, the house, $5 million in punitive damages for the adultery and asset hiding, and permanent alimony of $50,000 per month. That's completely unreasonable. What's unreasonable is your client committing fraud and thinking he could get away with it. Marcus finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. Please, he said. This will destroy me. I studied his face. The man I'd loved for 8 years, begging me not to take what was legally mine. The man who'd tried to throw me out of my own home without a second thought. You destroyed us first, I said quietly. I'm just finishing the job. The final settlement took another 2 weeks to negotiate, but Marcus's position only got weaker as more evidence emerged. Robert Kim had found financial records proving Marcus had been planning the divorce since before his grandfather's death. Bank statements showing payments to a private investigator he'd hired to follow me, looking for evidence of infidelity that would let him divorce me with cause. He'd been so sure I was cheating, so certain he'd find the ammunition he needed to justify throwing me away. Instead, all he'd accomplished was creating a paper trail of his own premeditation. The judge signed the final order on a Friday afternoon in December. $225 million. The mansion and all its contents. $7 million in punitive damages. Alimony that would continue until I remarried or died. Marcus had kept Cynthia through the first month of legal proceedings. She disappeared as soon as the asset freeze became public knowledge. Apparently, dating a man under federal investigation for fraud wasn't as glamorous as dating a mysterious millionaire. I moved back into the house the following Monday. Walking through rooms I'd been forced to abandon felt surreal, like touring a museum of my former life. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Marcus hadn't changed so much as a picture frame. Maybe he'd thought this would all blow over. Maybe he believed his own lawyers when they told him his prenup was airtight. The kitchen felt different now. Smaller somehow, despite being exactly the same size. I made coffee using the same machine, the same cups, but everything tasted different. Success, I discovered, had its own flavor. Sharp and clean and absolutely satisfying. My phone rang as I was watering the garden. Plants I'd thought were dead had somehow survived the winter. Life finding a way to continue, even when everything seemed hopeless. It was Patricia, my original lawyer, calling from Florida. Sweetheart, I saw the settlement in the legal journals. How are you feeling? Vindicated, I said. And tired. That's normal. You've been through a war. But you won. I know. Do you though? Because winning isn't just about the money. It's about proving to yourself that you're stronger than the people who tried to break you. Your husband thought he could discard you like an old piece of furniture. Instead, he discovered that furniture sometimes has teeth. I laughed at that. Actually laughed, for the first time in months. What happens now? I asked. Now you figure out what the rest of your life looks like. You're 42 years old with more money than most small countries. The world is yours. After we hung up, I walked through the house one more time, room by room, remembering what each space had meant when I'd thought this was my forever home. The living room where Marcus and I used to watch movies on Sunday afternoons. The dining room where we'd hosted dinner parties for his colleagues. The bedroom where we'd made plans for a future that had turned out to be a lie. None of it felt like home anymore. This house was the trophy in my victory over Marcus, proof that actions have consequences. But it wasn't where I wanted to build my new life. I called a realtor the next morning. The mansion sold within a week to a tech executive who'd made his fortune in cryptocurrency. He paid cash, no inspection, no contingencies. Apparently, when you have enough money, buying a house is as simple as buying groceries. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fought so hard to keep this house, spent months in court proving it was rightfully mine, only to sell it the moment I got it back. But that had never really been about the house. It had been about refusing to let Marcus decide what I deserved. 3 months later, I stood in the main cabin of a 58-foot sailboat anchored in a harbor in the British Virgin Islands. My boat, purchased with money that had once been Marcus's inheritance. The view through the windows showed crystal-clear water and islands covered in tropical vegetation. Paradise, paid for by a man who'd thought I was too stupid to fight back. David had called the week before with an update on Marcus's situation. The federal investigation had concluded. No criminal charges, but the civil penalties were severe. In addition to our divorce settlement, he owed back taxes, interest, and fines that consumed most of what remained of his inheritance. He'd been forced to sell his law practice to pay his debts. Cynthia had moved on to a hedge fund manager in Manhattan. Apparently, love really was conditional when it depended on net worth. He's working as a public defender now, David had told me, making about $60,000 a year. The alimony payments are bankrupting him. I should have felt satisfaction at that news. Maybe even pity. Instead, I felt nothing at all. Marcus had become irrelevant to my life, a minor character in a story that was no longer about him. The sun was setting over the harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and orange. Tomorrow I'd sail to the next island, or maybe stay here another week. Time meant something different now that it belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text message. A photo from my sister, showing her kids playing in their backyard sandbox. Under it, she'd written, "Uncle Marcus asked about you again. Should I tell him where you are?" I typed back quickly. Tell him I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Then I turned the phone off and watched the sun disappear into the horizon. In the distance, another sailboat was heading out to sea, its white sails catching the last light of the day. Going somewhere new, carrying someone toward possibilities they couldn't yet imagine. I understood the feeling perfectly. The money would last forever, invested wisely and protected by lawyers who specialized in keeping wealth away from people who wanted to take it. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the knowledge that I'd refused to be discarded. When someone tried to write me out of my own story, I'd taken the pen back and finished it myself. Marcus had taught me that marriage was a contract, that love was conditional, that trust was a luxury people like me couldn't afford. In trying to destroy me, he'd accidentally created something much more dangerous than a heartbroken wife. He'd created a woman who understood exactly what she was worth. And that woman was never going to settle for less again.